Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to the stream. Welcome, welcome. Hello, hello, hello. It's been a while. I've missed you all. Check out this hat that I'm wearing. 'Tis the season after all. Welcome, welcome. Let me take a quick moment to just say hi to you all. Hello. No, Kauno. Spepik, Kitty Cat, Zelf, Cyrix, Gorbindana. Hello, welcome, welcome, welcome. Kevin, Eric. Hi. Welcome to a very, very infrequent genre that I indulge in, which is the just chatting stream. Although I feel like I wouldn't fully be a real VTuber if I didn't attempt to do one of these every once in a while. But there are actually good reasons why I tend not to do just chatting streams. That's actually going to be some of the topics that we're going to talk about today. In terms of reading the chat, yes, I actually do have a part of my lore. My very, very first stream, I do mention that it is a different Fi every single time. Well, not always, because a neutrophil's longest lifespan is about 8 days. So occasionally you might see the same Fi, but canonically, yes, it is a new Fi every time. And I have to differentiate through all of that as well. Hello, surprise fans. Welcome to the stream. Welcome. And Blada, hello, welcome. All right, so it is the spooky season, of course, and I was recently at a Halloween party of quite a few people. I'd say that the number of people there maybe hit maybe 20-ish people, and I think for comfortable social interaction for me personally, I top out at like 6. And it's really curious because a lot of a lot of VTubers claim to be introverts, even though they chat for a living, essentially. And I say claim not in a derogatory way or disbelieving kind of way, but it's just there's a difference between introversion and eloquence. So it's not always the case that extroverted people are the most good at talking. It's not always the case that introverts are bad at talking. It's just in a large group like that, I find that I am overwhelmed with that many people to keep track of, because I'm actually not very good at yapping, right? I think I'm good at talking. That's why I think that this conversation is actually quite interesting, because I think yapping is one skill and continually talking is another, because I think yapping is a unique skill on its own that is separate from the things that I would typically do, say, in my job, right? So when I do a journal club for YouTube, I find that it's not that different than what I do for work. It's, of course, adjusted to be for a general audience, right? Whereas at my job, I am teaching undergrads who have a lot of biology background. And so I think it's interesting that even though in some ways I do talk for a living, in that context I am very comfortable, and I've begun to think of reasons why that might be, right? Now I think part of that has to do with the fact that when I'm teaching, a lot of the mental processes are maybe front loaded in the I'm trying to remember, anterograde cingulate cortex. I forget exactly what the brain region is called, but basically I'm running on autopilot, right? Memory. Whereas I think yapping is something entirely frontal cortex. Maybe people who are better at yapping have that on autopilot, but for me, I have to like think about what I want to say before I say it, which again sounds like I'm like bad-mouthing yappers, but I really do admire that kind of skill, because at the end of journal clubs I'll sometimes spend a bit of time talking to you all, but I generally find that at the end of a journal club I no longer have the mental agility to be a good chatter. I think I model a little bit of what Neil deGrasse Tyson has said. So when asked why he's so eloquent, he says, there's never a sentence that I've said out loud that I haven't first written down, and I think I embody that kind of academic nature of the fact that nothing I say I haven't in part rehearsed beforehand. Even this stream, right? I have a list of topics that I want to get to, and I've thought a little bit about what I wanted to say in each one of these topics, so I did do some pre-rehearsal. You could think of it that way. But what I admire about yappers is that there's no forethought or planning, and they just turn on the microphone and then they just go and they make entertaining content that the audience enjoys, which I find to be very, very admirable. A scientific term for yapping is lingoria. Did you also watch the Vsauce video? I just saw that. Hey, Clockwork, welcome. More fundamental improvisation. Yeah, I mean, I took improv a lot as a high schooler, and I did a couple of improv classes as an undergraduate, and definitely felt like I was at my maximum entertaining back then. So that's to say that I'm not inexperienced when it comes to the idea of improvising. I think something's changed in my life where I'm no longer able to access that skill. So at a large kind of gathering, a large party, I think people who are good at improv and good at yapping, they can take whatever the other person is saying and naturally come up with something to respond with. And I know that, it's probably me overthinking, et cetera, and getting in the way of myself in terms of, oh, just go out and have some fun, just like say whatever, and that's fine. But like for me, that's not really how I operate, right? I pride myself as an individual that is very intentional with the words that I choose. And I'm also like pilled in the way that like everything I do is content, right? Which is, you could argue, is not very healthy, but I don't think it's as bad as that phrasing makes it out to be, in the sense that when I am speaking to somebody, I want there to be some sort of value to the conversation. And so it is more clear to me on how to craft that value when it is intentional, right? Like yapping has benefits, right? It's like social lubricant, you can say. Just like you're just talking about whatever, and it's nice to talk to someone, and it's nice to be listened to, and it's nice to hear from somebody that you care about. So it's not that yapping is useless, it's that I think that it relies on more subconscious processes in the one-on-one conversations that I prefer to have, or small group conversations, right? 6 people, I said, is what I top out at in terms of being able to fully feel comfortable in a social situation like that. First stream I stuck around for, I really should learn more about biology. Unfortunately, we're not talking about biology today. I'm doing a self-indulgent just chatting stream. Good yappers just let their stream of consciousness out. That's why I think that I am not suited for just yapping, right? Because I feel like I have some sort of hard filter on at all times, which is useful when you're a teacher, right? Because you never want to upset a student and then have their parent try to get you fired. As ridiculous as that sounds, that kind of thing can happen. And so I tend to be very careful, and I think that, while I don't think that if I were to just do stream of consciousness that I would ever say something that's like super problematic, it's still, the instinct is to still like filter out what I say. And not only that, I'm also constantly sort of worried that what I have to say isn't entertaining or of value, right? I before yapping took on its ironic meaning, I had a very genuine fear that I talk too much, or that the things that I say aren't very interesting. And so I began to study. I began to study VTubers who I think are excellent yappers. The 2 that come to mind are Sidere, who's a part of V-Theorem, link in the description, and Faye Drosera, who I'm sure you can find out there, another educational content-esque VTuber. Esque. I see it, the filter. I don't mean esque. She actually does educational content for real. But I think like their strengths are both, like they're both incredible yappers in terms of just the technical ability to just turn on a microphone and jump from topic to topic, which made me think a lot about sort of the mechanics of why I feel like I can't do a similar thing. So that it kind of relates to stream, right? Like being at a big party of 20 people, where if you sort of plot the location of people, you kind of see that there's not one conversation happening. There are like 6 conversations happening, and then they bleed into one another. People leave certain groups, etc., etc. And at this party, I didn't really know everybody to a large extent, so I couldn't like pre-program what I was trying to say, because I have no idea what this person is interested in. Which again, you can fault me for, because not every social interaction has to like have value. I get that. Like, but I want my social interaction to have value, a tangible value, because again, just talking and listening to someone, that's already value. That's not, just talking is not valueless. I don't want to come across like, oh, like I'm too good for just talking normally. It's just that, like, when it comes to figuring out what I want to say in response to someone else, I often find myself unable to come up with anything. Just like blanks, not even anything. It's not that I can't come up with anything smart. It's because this filter of like everything I have to say has to have meaning, that filter, I think, prevents me from being good at just having this social lubricant as conversation, which I think is kind of interesting. What made you choose neurobiology over something like medicine? I think I would have made a terrible doctor. I am way too anxious of a human being, and I'm also a very go my own pace kind of guy. I would never last in the high paced, high stress environment of medicine. And also, my pre health advisor asked me what I wanted to do. I said I liked science and I wanted to help people, so he told me to get my PhD because the life of a doctor is miserable. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. Yapping comes to me quite often. Sadly, conversation does not. I think that's pretty interesting too, just because I want to know sort of what differentiates. Because I think Toxo is pretty good at both, and her job involves making people feel comfortable and having both ability to maintain good conversation but also yap, because I think yapping helps people feel comfortable because not everybody wants to have a serious conversation all the time. But I find that in terms of me, yeah, again, it sounds snooty, right? But I prefer conversation over yapping when I'm engaging in it. When it comes to listening, yapping, conversation, that's all good to me. But if I am a participant, I don't know if it's because I know that I'm bad at yapping that I prefer conversation, but I do prefer conversation. I feel like large gatherings will eventually butt off into smaller groups. Yeah, exactly. And so every new group is like rolling gacha, where every new person has their own preferences, interests, sense of humor, and I find myself dwelling on those quite often. It wasn't all bad, right? I wasn't like the meme of the guy in the corner being like, they don't know I'm a VTuber. I did chat. But I did sort of hover around the people that I already had a good sense for how to interact with, and I did not make the effort at all to talk to new people, which I think is bad because that's a skill that should remain sharp, right? It's never a bad thing to sharpen your schmoozing skills, even if it's in a low-stake, non-professional environment. It's just good to know how to talk to people you don't know. But at my age and environment, I don't have to do that very often, so I'm kind of letting that skill die off. Nice hat, thank you. Hi, I'm here. What have I missed? I'm just yapping about yapping, or rather having a conversation about yapping. And welcome to the stream, Silly Cat Boy, and Kowalski, and Bowtie. As a writer, yapping is a part of the hobby and our favorite topic. Interesting. I'd like to hear more about what you have to say about that. Like yapping as a writer? Yeah, if you could elaborate, that'd be kind of interesting to go down the path. I just have no idea what to say if it doesn't have value. Yeah, I'm the same way. And that's why I don't prefer these large gatherings of stranger acquaintances. I prefer... if I am to meet a new person, I would prefer for it to be in a very small group. That way I have time to sort of observe and learn and kind of build a model of how to interact with them, which sounds very robotic, but I think that everybody does it to some extent. I'm just more intentional, I guess, about that. Because I don't want to feel like I'm boring people, because I have a lot of things to talk about, but they are conversation topics. They're not really yapping topics. And I think those two are distinct. Being in a room with more than 5 people talking at once just makes me not want to talk at all. I'm bad at talking in groups. Yeah, I absolutely get that. And that's why I'm like max 6 people. Once it gets to that, then we all have to take turns, and then there's a weird dynamic, and then where do I butt in, and blah, 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 blah. That's why with streaming it's also more comfortable, and I can see why, like, despite a lot of VTubers being introverts, that they actually really enjoy streaming, because the arrangement, the agreement is more clear cut. I think you don't have to worry about talking over people or making sure everybody has like the equal time in conversation. There's a lot of social faux pas that can happen when you're doing this kind of stuff, but yeah. Which is kind of interesting, because in high school I wasn't this way at all. I would have like really big birthday parties. Well, big for the area that I lived in, considering property. We had a nice home growing up. But in terms of now that I've been to more places in the country, I know what a big house looks like, and we did not have a big house. But I had a lot of friends in high school, and I was much more extroverted. I had parties, sometimes going up to like 30 people, all of which I really wanted to be there. But something changed in undergraduate, I think, where I was no longer a very adept social butterfly, and then began to sort of cave in as the academic little gremlin that I am today. Especially when all I want to do is yap about esoteric niche stuff. I really want to make sure I'm providing as much utility as possible in a social situation and heavily filter. Yeah, that's why, like, yapping, I could never do that. A part of why I've been thinking about yapping as a construct is because, you know, we were having a meeting amongst us in V Theorem about thinking of sort of our standards for what we consider to be making enough educational content, right? So we're a group of educational VTubers, and one of the things that we want for our group is some sort of minimum standard, some reasonable expectation of how much of our content is devoted to talking about education or science. And I remember one of the members saying that, like, oh, you know, I originally found it was quite difficult when I was preparing a lot, but I've found that it's actually not. It's been getting easier to just turn on the mic and do science communication without any prep. And I was like, I could never. I don't relate to that at all. I even prepped for a just chatting stream. I prepare for everything. But I think that's what makes for a really good yapper is the confidence. Maybe it's confidence. Just the raw, charismatic confidence to know that whatever comes out of your mouth will be entertaining to somebody, which I think is kind of interesting. I think that's an approximate sociology of property where conversations tend to divide into groups of 2 to 3. Yeah, I think that is what I also observed at that party, but you don't exactly get to choose between, you know, what naturally splinters. It's kind of like an organic organism almost, a party, like some like group dynamic stuff that is really tough to navigate around when you put as much thought into what to say as I do. Yeah, I find that there are people who will I tend to do better when the people that I am talking to are interested in what I have to say, because it's very apparent to me when I start to like send out feelers and be like, I'm going to talk about something esoteric that I want to talk about for like 3 sentences, and judging by your response, I'm going to either leave this conversation or let you pivot it to something else. And the people that have shown genuine interest, I'm like, okay, I'm going to latch onto you, and I am going to do that until we go home. Is the difference between yapping and conversations that only one person talks while yapping? The original definition of yapping is when one person dominates the conversation and drones on and on and on. And on stream, that's an asset because of the dynamic between streamer and audience. Yeah, but I think you can apply yapping in regular conversation as well, in terms of just blather sounds rude, but again, I think that blather has an important social role in developing relationships, because again, you don't always want to bring the cognitive heat, and I get not wanting to always have to do that, which makes me a very annoying person to talk to unless there's something to play with in terms of thinking about stuff, right? Because I'd say that I am most at home, and I think that again, I think I'm a good conversationalist when there is a topic to dig deep on and to analyze. I'll say that that's my realm, I think, because conversation can mean all sorts of things, right? It could be storytelling, it can be humor, etc. It could be relating and responding. I think there are a lot of aspects of conversation, and my specialty is analysis. You know, surprise, surprise, I'm an academic, or, you know, I'm still in academia. Maybe I'm not an academic anymore because I'm not an active researcher, but with the propensities that I have, it makes sense that if we start off with something that you want my input in, then I can go all night. But if we're like talking about a TV show or a game or a story from work, I tend to be a conversational deadweight, to put it politely, I suppose. Starting uni during the pandemic only enforced my inability to form bonds with fellow students. Yeah, I totally get that. I think the pandemic really hurt a lot of potential for autonomy and relationship forming. So that'll be what your generation has to face, or at least one of the things that your generation has to face. I've considered writing as a hobby, but all of my stories never make it out of the planning phase. Keep doing it. Eventually, you'll be happy enough to put your writing somewhere. I've been writing on and off since I was in high school, which was, you know, more than a decade ago, and it took me a decade plus to actually publish via the neutrophil in the form of videos and scripting, right? But I've been writing, and some long time stream viewers will know that I've had a lot of writing projects that I've started and stopped, and I've even gotten a grant for a writing project about science communication that I actually had to refund the money for because I never finished it. So you not finishing or publishing is maybe normal. And the more you do it, the closer you will get to having your abilities match with your taste, which would be my unsolicited advice. Yeah. Yeah, what's the link to the Discord? Let me get that for you real quick. Yeah, so a lot of the conversation topics that we're going to go through today have been sort of, I'm not going to say pre-planned, but the Discord has been pretty nice in terms of a nice place to vent my excess thoughts that have nothing to do with biology, because so let me say this, just because I don't want to come across as like some sort of intellectual elitist, right? Because that's, again, being very careful about acknowledging that just talking to people is a skill, and it's not that I'm like unrelatable, it's just that I like overthink a lot. Oh gosh, this police siren just totally knocked the idea out of my head. What was I gonna say? I lost it. I lost it. Yeah. Okay, maybe it'll come back to me. Talking about anything detailed is so hard because of imposter syndrome. Yeah, I mean, I totally get that. And I went to therapy to get over my imposter syndrome, which is actually one of the topics that I was maybe thinking of getting to, like, else, some other time, but it might be a good pivot. Maybe not. We'll save that maybe for a different day. I wish I never learned about prion folding. Prion diseases are extremely, extremely rare. It's just, I know there's, and that's kind of why I tried to not make the prion video very scary, because you definitely could take advantage of people's fear when it comes to prion folding. I only left the scary part at the beginning just to acknowledge that people think that it's scary, and to like hook people in, and then from there it's just science and hope, right? Like I think someone posted in the Discord about mountain lions having a digestive system capable of destroying prions. So who knows what else we'll find. The fact that lichens can digest prions, that was also very interesting during that journey. So it's scary. It kept me up at night when I was a kid, but the part of being a scientist is hope, right? Is having hope for the future and discovery and advancement and all that stuff. My hot take is that yapping has irreversibly damaged our perception of intellectualism and complex ideas that can't be explained in one sentence or slogan. I think that's, I think that goes a little far, although I can't really speak to Gen Z. I think it's, I kind of see what you mean. Here's what I'll say. I think a really talented communicator can convey complex ideas in short form, and as long as people are continuing to do that, I think we'll be okay. And if you go to grad school, you get a lot of experience with that, because grants and papers give you draconian word counts, and so you're almost forced to become a good communicator when you do science. I was not great at initiating conversation or asking questions during my school years, but I guess I've gotten sort of better at that. I've only gotten worse, which I think is kind of hilarious, because I think people do trend getting better, but it just didn't work for me. I was in middle school during the pandemic, and most people who are around my year have zero social skills. I just had to leave a social event because the creep that's been harassing. Creeps are not, creeps are in every generation, believe me. What I'll say is that the students that I've had, it's kind of hard because I moved schools after the pandemic, so I can't really generalize, but at least the class that I teach right now, the students get along quite well. So I wonder how you can measure how much damage the pandemic has done. I'm not saying that it hasn't, but I'm just wondering to what extent that is true. I think that'd be interesting to see going forward, and what parts of the pandemic we can fault, and what parts are increasing reliance on technology for our social communication. Yeah, I think that'd be interesting to look into. You should make more shorts. We'll see if I can get some funding to do shorts in the future. We'll just see. I've talked to someone who's involved in academic biology, and they say that the new people who spent formative years in COVID are not doing well. I think that is. I think that there was a period of time where that was true a couple years ago. Now I think we've kind of normalized again, because you can imagine taking introductory biology remote probably made it quite hard to pick up on everything. But I feel like it's gotten a little better. But I'll just have to see. Of course, a very small sample size that I have personally, but I wouldn't be surprised. Remote learning just did kind of throw a wrench in everything. I was actually initially very optimistic about the prospects of remote learning when I was teaching in graduate school, because the medical school system relies a lot on remote learning. But I suppose the difference is by the time you're in medical school, you're kind of already like a fully formed adult, and you can opt into remote learning. So they weren't completely reliant on remote learning, but if you were a student, you, for a lot of schools, had the option to do it, and those students do as well-ish as the students who would go in person in lectures. So that's why I had this false idea that, oh, maybe remote learning isn't as bad because medical students can do quite well on it, not realizing that medical students are some of the best students in the country, right? They had to grind into dust essentially to get into medical school, so that's not a great model to follow. But you know, that just speaks a little bit to our naivete. Yeah. Remote learning made it hard for a generation of kids to learn skills like don't be at the right times. Again, again, the skeptic in me, the academic skeptic in me, it makes sense. The model makes sense. The mechanism makes sense. Then you hear the song like "Teenagers Scared the Living Out of Me," and you realize that children have always been a problem. I'm curious as to if there's research on trends in terms of whether or not bad behavior is more prevalent post-pandemic or not, because I want to give Gen Z a lot of credit, right? I don't want to be like other generations that look down on younger generations and just make blanket assumptions about their conditions, or, you know, oh, they're worse off than we are. I'll say that you have had unique challenges in terms of comparing between our age groups, but I wouldn't be. I'm willing to give a lot, I think, until I read research that proves otherwise, I would say. Lectures are optional. 90% people still go. That's very interesting. I wonder what the average lecture attendance is depending on which school you go to, because from my understanding, at least the medical schools that I was familiar with, it was a bit more even than 90%. So I'm kind of curious as to what it's like in the broader spectrum of medical schools. It's because it's hard because any two generations are never the same age at the same time. Yeah, exactly. That's why, like, I don't know. I think I don't envy growing up at the same time as Gen Z. I think that, you know, in terms of like developing our relationship, Gen Z and millennials, in terms of like, you know, it's this fake war on TikTok or whatever, you've had unique challenges, and so have we. And I just think it's good to acknowledge that there were unique challenges between the two generations, and that we should not be very quick to assign blame to a whole cohort of people. As obvious as that sounds, it does bear repeating, I think. Yeah, so this yapping thing, is that, yeah, okay. So part of why I think, and I'm going to change topics here, although it is kind of dovetailing off of the yapping, even when I'm doing a just chatting stream, I still have a logical progression that I wanted to go to. So let me change this text. Anxiety and what's this other word? Vulnerability. Yeah. I think that's a pretty interesting topic. Okay, so anxiety and vulnerability. So I'm not like a mental health streamer, nor would I ever be, and this is not a conversation that I am having because I'm going through some stuff. It's just I'm going to talk about anxiety as a personality trait and not as mental illness, because I think that that's not really my game. You know, I'm not like a qualified mental health anything or whatever, but I think the yapping thing naturally leads into this particular conversation that I find kind of interesting because anxiety, I think, is interesting, or at least adaptive anxiety. I think it has something interesting, an interesting role in my personal life, I should say. So part of why I think that I am not a great yapper but a better conversationalist is because I am like very wrought with anxiety, like all the time. I think that, you know, if you watched Inside Out 2, I think that was a pretty good movie. I related very much to it, but also the representation of your emotions kind of piloting your brain, and one of them being the dominant pilot. My dominant pilot would definitely be anxiety. I think that I am principally, deep to my core as a neutrophil run by programs that are trying to predict risk in the future, right? And that's very obvious when it comes to a party situation where I'm just beefing conversation or feeling out of my wits because I am trying to predict the future in terms of how someone will react to something that I say. And of course, that's a very demanding task in terms of synapses firing, right? So that's why I don't think that conversations with strangers or vague acquaintances, those are not situations that I do well in. But if I have one good interaction with somebody, then I think I'm good. From then on, I've built enough of a model, like I know what works, and then I'm chilling. So I don't want to like fall into the stereotype of VTubers who are all like asocial introverts who don't know how to talk to people. I think I can talk to people. I think that I'm quite good at it. It's just that the context has to be correct, right? Out of a comfortable context, I think I'm pretty bad at it. I was having a conversation, an open and honest conversation on the Discord about autism, right? And I don't actually have in-person autistic friends anymore. I did when I was in high school for sure, but after undergraduate, I don't know, I just there haven't really been autistic people, or at least if they are autistic, then I would not have known they were autistic. So I kind of lost touch with that entire experience from a personal standpoint. And at one point I had asked the question of, like, if you could take a pill that sort of ameliorated the parts of autism that might make it difficult or annoying to function in a society that is maybe not very accommodating to people with autism, would you take it? And I had some really great feedback from people saying, well, it's kind of a part of my personality or a part of my being, and so the answer to that would be no. And that gave me a lot of food for thought, because I actually remember having this exact conversation with a couple of friends about they were recommending that I partake in a certain herbal treatment that reduces anxiety. Let's just put it that way. A little bit of herbal remedy for anxiety that is quite popular in amongst a certain age group, and I thought about whether or not I would do that, because I don't have a moral opposition to it, although I did as a kid, as a naive, like moralistic, judgmental little twerp that I was. But at my current age, I'm like, yeah, if you want to self-medicate with whatever, that's your God-given right as a free American or whatever, depending on the state that you live in. So no longer having those reasons to deny the herbal treatment, I had to have an honest conversation with myself about whether or not I felt comfortable taking something that is known to change anxiety. So some people get more anxious, some people get less anxious. And I ultimately decided, ironically, through my anxiety, that taking this herbal treatment was potentially denying a part of me that is so core to my personality that it felt wrong. And I'm not I'm not like I'm not drawing a direct comparison between autism and anxiety, but I will say that there are parallels in my personal life with regards to, like, if I could take a pill that would rid me of my anxiety, would I? And the answer to that for me would also be no, because so much of my life has been lived with anxiety that I actually think that I'm happy with the level of anxiety that I currently have. Because I think that from when I was a kid, growing up to immigrant parents, the anxiety train sort of, I grew up with a constant sense of anxiety of like, oh, if I didn't study hard, then I'd end up living under a bridge, and so that kind of propelled me into a lot of hard work over the years that eventually landed me a very comfortable position where I get to do content and stuff. And I'm not judging anybody who does choose to partake. You know, it's just different for different people, right? For me, my relationship with my anxiety is friendly. I would say that I don't view my anxiety, right? Like, you know, other people who have maybe general anxiety disorder, they might view it as a downside. For me, my personal relationship with my own anxiety is friendly. I actually am okay. I've accepted that I am an anxious person, and I don't view it as debilitating because I function quite well. And I think part of that functioning is actually due to my anxiety, which some therapists might say is cope. You know, they might call that cope. But I think that that's, for me, not true. I do think that the amount of suffering that I have from being anxious a lot of the time is quite minimal. I just have like a low grade anxiety all the time, but I think that anxiety is motivating and protective, and I'm actually pretty chill with it. Am I diagnosed? No, I don't have a diagnosed anxiety disorder, nor do I think that I actually would, judging by the diagnostic criteria. I don't think it interferes with my life. In fact, I think it's gotten me my job. Which I think is interesting. Is it worth going to a psychologist for no reason? So what I'll say, having spoken to therapists, is that therapy works best for people who know what they're there for and are willing to take action to address those issues. I had therapy, not for anxiety, actually, it's for imposter syndrome. So actually, this is a pretty good place to talk about that. And some of my longer term viewers may have heard this story already, but I have a very short memory for a biologist. In terms of working memory, the number of items I can keep in my head is about 5, and I feel like it gets worse every year. So what that basically means is that when I was learning to read papers, I would forget the beginning of a sentence by the time I got to the end, which is also why in the speedrun club with Clockwork, you look at me not even read the paper. Data is more easily readable than sentences for me at this point. So I was feeling really like not smart, and I had gone to a very prestigious high school, a very competitive, prestigious high school, and I've been a part of competitive, prestigious schools my entire life. And so, you know, it's not blaming my parents for anything, goodness no, because in some ways, depending on what you're capable of and what your skills are, you know, one path, and it's not the only path to living a life where you can have money in your pocket and a roof over your head, is through academia. And it turned out that I'm happy with that despite the grueling academic crunch for 20 years or whatever, I would do it all over again. But those kinds of things don't come without prices, right? So part of that system is that from a very young age, no matter how hard I worked, I was never in top 5%, for example. Like that there felt like there was this insurmountable barrier between me and greatness, which is going to be another topic for later in the stream, this idea of greatness. So growing up in that environment where you're never allowed to think that you're smart despite genuinely wanting to do well, right? Like if you are a kid who shows up to class and you just kind of half-ass it and go about your day, it's not a big deal that you don't get the grade that you want. But if you were there and you're there to grind, and despite all of your grinding, you see that the ceiling for achievement is so above you, it feels like you will never be successful. which is obviously not true. This is a very privileged subset of people that I have been surrounded by my entire life, with very gifted and a privileged education. So of course, with all the tools and support, you're going to have some fabulously supported and capable people come out of that educational system. But again, it's not free. You don't always come out of those situations completely healthy. So it's kind of a self-perpetuating problem too, because the anxiety over not being good enough, there's a feedback loop where that makes you work harder. And because you work harder, you do see some success. And so because you see some success, you get into successful places. And I went to, not to brag, but I'm totally bragging a little bit, one of the best graduate schools in the country. But then you are still a small fish in a big pond, right? Then you go to that institution, then you're like, oh my God, the ceiling is still so high. And then you just never feel good enough. And so this was something that was in my entire life. And so I went to therapy to undo some of that harmful thinking. Because it was making me unhappy and sensitive, I should say. Like I got very defensive over perceived insults to my intelligence, put it that way. Which is like it's silly. Because cognitively, I understand that I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I also feel like I've worked hard enough to be that. So it's like my ego, my intrinsic ego, and a lifetime of being shown the ceiling were in conflict. And actually going to therapy, which I would recommend if you have an issue that you think you can resolve by unwinding a part of you that you don't want to unwind, can be quite helpful, I would say. And that does go into a topic that I wasn't prepared to talk about right at this moment, but this idea of vulnerability, right? Because I'm, again, a good conversationalist, I think. So I'm willing to talk about stuff that relates to me personally, or painful moments from my childhood or whatever, because I've intellectualized it all, right? I've made it all into a game, basically, an academic game where I am a subject to be analyzed. And because I myself am a subject to be analyzed, there's a removal of the emotion from the thought. So I'm actually quite open when it comes to talking about things that are more painful, just because when I do so, I'm looking at it from the lens of a scientist. And I'd been doing this for so long that when I was in therapy, my therapist asked me to describe how certain situations had made me feel, which was interesting for me because I responded with, well, and I did this totally like not as a meme. I would say things like, well, when that happened, like my heart rate went up and I felt like I had cold palms. And my therapist went, so what emotion is that? And then I said, well, I don't want to ascribe it an emotion because I don't know what emotion that is. I'm just reporting the objective fact here. And she had to be like, it's okay to label the feeling with an emotion because you are denying the fact that it is affecting you emotionally. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. And I think I can count on maybe one hand that I felt, the number of times that I felt actually emotional or vulnerable in conversation, that there was something scary right underneath the surface that was about to explode, when I was forcing myself to try and label the feelings that I had. And I think that this deconstruction of my therapy session is interesting content. And I think I am intellectualizing that session, but I think because I had gotten what I wanted out of that session, I feel like I made a pretty complete recovery where I'm nowhere near as like sensitive with regards to my intelligence as before. A lot of people are skeptical over the value of therapy. That's fair. Not every therapist is great. In fact, I went to therapy again and found that I didn't like mesh with my therapist then. But I had one that was really good, so I recommend shopping around. And you can also cry in front of another human being if that's what you need to do. But like legitimately after the session, I felt that I no longer had to look up at the ceiling in terms of evaluating what greatness meant for myself, and that was a lot of pressure that was relieved. And I think that without that burden, without that extra burden, my own anxiety is only useful. It's not always useful. I mean, if I didn't have anxiety, I'd be a better yapper, for example. But I would prefer to keep the benefits of my protective anxiety than to become a good yapper, just because, you could argue that's what I'm familiar with, but it has been very useful, I think. Do you think your anxiety might be caused by a form of OCD? I'm pretty sure I'm relatively neurotypical. I don't know if OCD counts in the realm of neurodiversity, but I don't think I have OCD. I just think that from the way that I grew up, anxiety was the way to survive. Not in a literal sense, because again, very privileged education and a background, but like it was a way to intellectually survive, I should say that. Hey, Megacraft, welcome. Anxiety is a big part of decision making, so removing it would destroy many respects of functioning normally. Yeah, exactly. I just think that people who know me might think that I overvalue my own anxiety, that they think that I could benefit from an herbal treatment of some sort. But I don't agree, because I think that I'm like a little afraid of what I would be without anxiety. Is also interesting because that's sort of an evolutionary drive to survive, right? The part of my brain that is anxious is able to affect change in my behavior by protecting itself from destruction if there was a pill that would destroy that part of it. So that's worth thinking about, I think. I think it's a pretty interesting thought. I've never considered memorization synonymous with intellect. Neither have I. But the way that it felt in that suppressive intellectual environment was that there were students who didn't have to work very hard to outperform me, whereas I was busting my ass, quite hard, only to underperform them, which felt quite unfair. I mean, I wasn't entitled to success, right? But I'm like, damn, some people's brains are just different. And that biological essentialism really hurt in terms of developing into a mentally healthy adult. So if you're out there and you're like a student, just know that like there are aspects of your intellect that can't quite be captured by a number. And what my therapist helped me realize is that the value that I add in terms of the way that my brain works is that I am slow. That because I am not quick on the uptake, that I have to dedicate more of my rumination time to ensuring that what I do is good quality. And yes, there are people who can probably do what I do at a faster pace, but I will get faster because if I continue to do the things that I love to do, I'll just get better at it. And getting better does mean getting faster. Sort of ruminating on things and being stuck on things and sidetracked and tunnel visioned, which has harmed sort of my academic performance, is an asset when it comes to doing the things that I love, right? YouTube, making content, playing D&D, being a DM, writing, ambitious creative projects, right? The parts of me that are slow are the parts that I use to just live my life, and the anxiety pairs well with it because there's an underlying there's like a thing behind the surface, I think, of I no longer have academic heights to conquer, right? Like I'm in my more or less a terminal position. It can be terminal. And there are no more dragons. Like, what was the quote? Like, for Alexander wept, for there were no more dragons to slay, or something like that. And I think what propels me to do my creative work is a level of anxiety with regards to whether or not I will achieve some sort of idea of greatness before I pass. Before the line passes, right? Because every new stream is a different fi. Which is grim, and you could argue that that's the underlying mentality that drove Mr. Beast into madness, right? But I think that the journey is the fun part, where this vague idea of greatness is something that I am trying to work towards, and I don't even really know exactly what I mean by greatness. Is it a number? Is it money? Who knows what it is? But this idea that I have no more dragons to slay, and the only thing left to achieve is a feeling that I've achieved enough. And the journey to feeling like I've achieved enough is fun. I don't know when it'll end. I don't know if I'll ever feel like I've achieved enough, but it gives my life a sense of purpose, which I think is quite interesting. You scientist, your therapist, I very much did. I can kind of relate to that. Sometimes I just feel like I'm not intelligent enough, and I feel so awkward when someone says that I'm smart, as I feel that's not true. That's interesting, because that can be for all sorts of different reasons, right? Like, I am someone who I think can communicate in a smart way, where a conversation with me for people, I think I can come across as quite intelligent. At least that's what I've heard from people who are not in academia. I think if you are in academia, I'm just a guy. Then it's my fancy word magic doesn't really matter. But outside of academia, I feel like I can be perceived in that way, despite having, you know, before I didn't really feel smart. Now I do. Just I have a more narrow definition of what I think, or a more broad definition of what smart actually means. So it could just be that, like, the conversational, the yapping ability, right, or the conversational ability, that those are skills that can help you convince not only yourself but also other people of your smartness. Channel that Darwin slow thought. Yeah, I mean, someone's got to do it. You know, we live in a society, we can't all have the same archetype anyway. That would not make for a very fruitful collaboration across community. Most of the people that seem to naturally do better are probably perfectionists with OCD who feel exactly like you do. I don't really think so. I don't completely agree with that, because perfectionism and OCD can be paralyzing. And I don't really think that that is adaptive. For example, I don't think that I'm a perfectionist, even though Toxo might disagree in certain aspects, because if you look at my videos, there are little errors here and there, little bits of audio that I could have re-recorded, little mouth sounds that I could have edited out. And there's a level of quality that I'm okay with not having, as long as I get the content out in a timely manner so that I can move on to the next interesting idea. What I think is, why I think that she thinks that I have perfectionism is because I care a lot about the words that I use. And in that regard, you know, a script will never be complete. At some point, I just have to cut it off when it's good enough. Otherwise, I just never get anything done. But I think that this like life quest of greatness, you could say, that's I would like to feel like I am making good choices to achieve what that could mean. Categorizing intellect and its properties is a mess, but type 2 slow thought is goated along with type 1 quick thought. I don't actually know what those, I've never actually heard of those. So I'd have to look those up in the future. Jesus wept. Was it Jesus who wept? For there were no more worlds to conquer. What a chilling quote, I think. My philosophy is to try your best. If things don't work out, there is nothing you could do. I'm quick to accepting my fate, but that makes it easy for me to not dwell on the past. Yeah, that's I think a superpower that Toxo has as well. She's just like, if it fails, it fails. But also Toxo is an incredibly hard worker, a way harder worker than I am, actually. But I will dwell a lot, I think, on failure, and I think that is maladaptive, just in terms of like happiness score, but it's never been maladaptive with regards to doing the things that I love to do, which is why I think that like this is okay in terms of my relationship with my anxiety, right? Because my anxiety's never stopped me from doing anything that I love. It's only made it uncomfortable sometimes. My hot take is that intelligence is mostly based on the environment someone was raised in. Again, mostly don't want to do any of these broad generalizations in terms of contribution of nature and nurture, but you know, it is known that environment does play a role in just the quality of education that you get. And I was certainly blessed with a great environment, although great doesn't always mean emotionally supportive, we'll say. I get a lot of anxiety about if people think I'm smart or not, in a way where it makes it difficult to talk about any of the intelligent things that I like. It's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's interesting, because I just can't relate to that. I acknowledge that that does sound like it sucks. I'm not a therapist. I'm not going to offer help. But I am curious as to why, or if you have any insight as to what caused that. Um, like if there had been inciting incidences where you have been shown to not know what you're talking about or something like that. Because I've actually had that happen to me before. It's actually something that I occasionally revisit, drifting into bed, getting called out in a humanities class for something that I definitely should have been more prepared for. Yeah. So I think that it's interesting to talk about these issues because I don't feel vulnerable at all talking about this kind of stuff, because again of the intellectualizing. So I think that the unique role of therapy is that in order to sort of rewire maybe a little bit of how you operate, some of those defenses that you do, including intellectualizing, have to be like carefully dismantled so that you can actually feel to the full extent that you need to feel it, the stuff that you might want to undo, which I think is an interesting insight that I would not have had if I hadn't gone to therapy. I don't think there's been a specific past event that caused it. I think that it's from anxiety about not knowing if I know as much about what I'm talking about as I think I might. So this is something that I actually, maybe there is something that I can say that might address that. I obviously don't know you or your background, but at least in academia, if you are a graduate student and you spent a couple of years studying your field of interest, you are an expert at that point. Now, you aren't the most expert of experts, but in a field of random people, you will be the expert. And it's kind of like a trope of like, you don't have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in your training, which I think is a useful way to think about it because, biological essentialism, oh, my brain is slow, I can't do this, I can't do that, because it's linked to I as a concept. But in terms of just like the number of hours I spent reading, like, yeah, okay, I spent like, how many papers did I read to prepare for my general exam? Dozens and dozens. And how many hours have I spent documenting every detail? I made a monster spreadsheet to overcome my short-term memory problems, right? Yeah, this is a fun story to tell. So like, yeah, I have short-term memory, not diagnosable, not in a diagnostically relevant range where it actually severely affects my ability to do things. I just don't remember things very well. So I made a monster Google spreadsheet of every single paper that was relevant to my PhD topic. And in that spreadsheet, I had every relevant data point that I could possibly need to call upon while being grilled on the exam. So instead of having to vaguely remember the points in like 30 papers, I had a spreadsheet of concise data points that I could cite, which helped a lot, helped me pass on my first try, which was very nice. Where was I going with this? Why did I start talking about my PhD? Don't remember. Yeah. So if you have a topic that you are very passionate about and you did spend hours and hours and hours of researching it, maybe, again, not advice, not like official, because I'm not, whatever, but you might want to try thinking about it in terms of if the average person spent this number of hours researching this topic that you love, would you trust what they had to say? Taking yourself out of the picture, I think, could be a good strategy, maybe. From my perspective, intelligence is anything that involves thinking with your brain. So if you have something specific you are good at, even if it is not useful, you are intelligent. I agree with that. A typical example that I like to use is I have no idea how my car works, nor do I intend on learning. And every time that I have attempted to learn, I fall flat. A car mechanic will know more about a car than I ever will. And I will know more about how the immune system functions in a brain than any car mechanic will. So it's not like one is not inherently less intelligent than the other. It's just as a society, we have deemed academia to have this branding of intelligence, whereas a car mechanic, I'm sure it's quite difficult to fix cars as well, and incomprehensibly so, because I don't even know where to begin with that kind of thing. How does a neutrophil wear a hat? Like this. Also, welcome to the stream, Izzy. I have anxiety about being misunderstood when I talk a lot of times. I'll be talking about a thing and people will just pick at 1 or 2 words I said when I deliberately chose 100+ words that relate. Yeah, that's why I spend a lot of time editing my scripts, right? And thinking and practicing speaking, because of those misunderstandings. But I also am intrinsically motivated to do so. It's not just the extrinsic motivation of like getting punished for saying something wrong. It's also just that I know when a sentence works really well, because I have a level of taste, and if I write a sentence that I like, I am confident enough in my own ability that an audience will also enjoy that sentence. That's confidence that was built up over time, and certainly helped by 2 viral-ish, whatever. Different people have different ideas of what it means to have gone viral, but 2 semi-successful YouTube videos, I think that has built up my confidence quite a bit. My friend has brain damage, multiple hemorrhages, and has no short-term memory. He would tell me the same thing a few times a day like it was new. Yeah. Brain damage is a topic that I had studied in my latter half of my PhD. And I think that for me, in terms of what appeals to me emotionally the most in terms of topics to research and subjects to share are things like brain injury, things that dramatically change the way that your consciousness operates. So like locked-in syndrome, hemorrhage, stroke, etc., etc. That was my personally motivating health problem when I was in graduate school. What's your favorite extinct animal? Velociraptor is the one that comes to mind, even though it's gotten a few revisions across scientific time. Velociraptor, probably. The quality of your last video was certainly something to be confident about. Thank you very much. I think that the video did quite well, and I'm just waiting to see what the algorithm thinks of it. I'm to the point where even if the algorithm doesn't pick up on it, I am happy enough with the video that I think I did a good job. It's just about whether or not people want to click on the topic, which I think is out of my control, really. At what point did I stop my PhD? In my 6th year, because COVID stopped all research and I wanted to leave. And research life wasn't for me. As someone with like pretty consistent anxiety, research is also just a life of anxiety. So compounding my personal anxiety with, the life of a researcher, that combined it's not sustainable long term for me. I couldn't do it. But teaching is great, because teaching, I was already teaching. I essentially started teaching when I was in high school, teaching for the SAT. So, getting a job in using skills that I've been developing since I was a kid, that felt like it was a lot more suited for me than a life of research. I'm not a biologist or anything, but the plasticity of the brain is amazing to me. Yeah, it's amazing to me too, which is why I studied it, parts of it in graduate school. Successfully defending your PhD is fun. Yeah, I mean, I do feel a little sad about not being able to do that because I left in the last year. But I do know that if I had stayed at my program, judging when my colleagues graduated, it would have taken me another 2 years, and I was not ready to dedicate another 2 years of my life to that lifestyle. That became too much. But the proof that like the therapy really worked in terms of like becoming more confident in my own skin is that like, was I upset that I never got to say, hey, I'm a doctor, PhD holder, whatever? Yeah, it's a little upsetting, but I actually don't feel that bad about it, because I think that my true calling is in education and in communication, which doesn't really require a PhD anyway. As long as you do the level of quality, the quality work of a PhD, you don't actually have to hold a degree to do that. Do you have any subjects you want to cover as videos in the future? I have like 30 ideas on the idea list. So many. I have 2 entire first drafts of videos that will come out I don't know when, but there will never be a shortage of video ideas. It's more about which video will tickle the algorithm in just the right way, I think. Do you know how plant immune systems work? If I recall, they don't have neutrophils or stuff like that. It's chemical warfare, and actually I talked a little bit about that with Nep on a previous stream that you can find on this channel. So chemical defenses, destroying things with chemical reactions. Very, very cool. There's plenty of time to finish whatever you want to do. No hurry in life. I mean, that's like the typical thing that people tell me when they find that I never finished my PhD. It's like, oh, you could return and get it if you want later. I'm like, yeah, but I don't need it, and I kind of don't want it, and I'm doing what I love anyways. So beyond that, getting a PhD is just vanity at that point. I think I'd like to do teaching as a full-time job at some point as well. I've always enjoyed it, and I'm a bit scared of the publish or perish environment in academia. Very, very true. I will say that as of right now, it's tough because there are not that many full-time teaching positions that don't pay like absolute garbage. Although lab instructor is a very nice job if you can find a full-time position that lets you do that, depending on what subject you want to teach. Humanities have a much harder time paying a living wage with people who just want to teach for a living. At my work, they've been giving people contracts with terms that mean they need a certain amount of research output a year, but most of the time it's not realistic. Yeah, like some people really thrive in that environment, and I will always have an incredible amount of respect for researchers. And that is actually a really good transition point to talking about my time at my departmental retreat. But before that, I'm just going to go to the loading screen for a hot second as I go feed my cat, Prakinji. So I will be right back. It is time for Prakinji to eat. I'd hoped to end stream before, but that's just not going to happen. So I will be right back. Don't go anywhere. All right, I am back. So let's change this topic. Prekinji is happily munching on her food. What's next on the topic list here? Departmental retreat. Okay, so hold on, let me see if anybody said anything in chat. How different are neutrophils and immune systems between different vertebrates? Like, how different is a dog's immune system to ours? Why can't they get the corona? It's a pretty hard question to answer. Similar and different. It just more depends on the virus than it does on the immune system, right? Like, we have the same parts generally, vertebrates. Birds are a little weird if you go back far enough. But in terms of generally how the immune system works, it's, pretty similar across mammals, at least. The reason why dogs can't get COVID is they can't get COVID yet. You never know with how this thing mutates, right? Is what I would think that the answer is. What is the name of the music on the loading screen? You can find that in the description of this video, actually. It is, I think, Tea Time by... Oh, I'm forgetting the name, but it's down there somewhere. I think also down there is a link to my second channel. Is it actually down there? I don't know. Give me a second. If I do like 5 bits or whatever, they're probably going to be down there. In case you want to check that out. Maybe we'll just type it in here. Or is it actually in there? Is it in the description? No. Okay, let me edit that real quick. Second channel is by the neutrophil. Okay. Now that updated description, you should be able to subscribe to my second channel where I will upload the 5 bits in case you wanted to check those out. All right. I think I should maybe post another link to the Discord in case that there were other people who have joined since then. There we go. Retarat. Oh, Halo Toxo. Yes, Retarat. Let me fix that. Retreat. Yeah. Okay, so so what a departmental retreat is, if you are unfamiliar, it is a conference where the department of the university gets together and sort of shares the exciting research that they are doing. It's often the times an opportunity for earlier stage scientists to practice their public communication skills, because most of the talks are given by grad students and postdocs, with things like keynote speakers and select talks from faculty as well. So what I'll say is that to not give like doxal information, because I don't want to like talk about the research in a way that's so specific that you're able to track where exactly I am. But this year there was a lot of focus on cancer as a topic, which I found to be interesting. Because cancer is something that I've been reluctant, I think, to learn, perhaps. It's quite relaxing listening to this while writing a lab report for my Get Biochemistry course. I'm glad. Go ahead and do those. What are you learning in biochem right now? If it's a lab report, Michaelis-Menten stuff, rate of reaction, let me know. We already know where you are. You're in my bloodstream as good as any good neutrophil should be. That's true. Hopping around in the lymph nodes. But yeah, cancer is something that I've personally not focused on entirely, because there is... I think if you're a biologist, you have to have some level of separation between the topics that you learn about and feeling like you're gonna die all the time. So medical students do this kind of, right? Like first year medical student syndrome, where every medical student thinks that they are afflicted with horrible diseases that they read about. And I think if I had gone into cancer research, I would have been the same, pretty much, right? Health anxiety, exactly. Like, I think that something like brain injury, well, I don't have a brain injury, so I'm not as afraid of brain injury, and I'm not often putting myself in positions to receive brain injury, although I did play around with the idea of boxing as a high schooler, which I thankfully didn't, because don't get hit in the head. There's no safe way to get hit in the head, so don't do that to yourself. What was I saying? Yeah, so I found that the conference was interesting because it kind of forced me to sit down and actually learn a thing or two about cancer that I didn't already get from graduate school. But the thing that I wanted to talk about today was the keynote speaker and the impression that I had gotten from if we were playing Civ 6, like, you know, a great scientist, potentially, right? Like a contender for great scientist as a category, which, you know, you can maybe predict kind of dovetails in with my conversations about greatness as a concept. And it was a good lecture, but it went by really quick, really fast. And you know, the speaker was talking about how we have to like rethink cancer, that our current not methods, but rather our current philosophy on how cancer works is maybe not very useful. I'm not going to say accurate, because he wasn't making that argument. He was making the argument that our drug development strategies maybe should be given a facelift in terms of how we think about what targets are good to attack when it comes to curing something like cancer. I thought it was a really good talk. It was fascinating. But what left a huge impression on me was the fact that throughout all this data, throughout all of the experiments that he was just blazing through, all of this philosophical work and scientific work proving and providing evidence for a certain philosophy of drug discovery, throughout all of that build up for a slide where he had shown that they had developed a drug that allowed a 9-year-old girl go cancer free without remission for I think like a decade or something, and then he moved right on. If that were me, I would have celebrated at least a little bit on that slide. But if you had zoned out, it was almost as if that aspect of the story wasn't a huge deal to this scientist. And I don't think that's because that the scientist himself was like callous or something. A 9-year-old at the time of treatment, not 9-year-olds at the time of the treatment. Yeah, and I don't think that the scientist is heartless and didn't want to acknowledge the human effects on the drug, but rather knew the audience that he was talking to, a bunch of other scientists interested in curing cancer. And if it were me, I would have written the story a bit differently. I would have focused more on the actual success of the current methods. And in that moment, I had kind of reflected on, I think, one appearance of greatness, and it certainly made me feel that way. Not that he ignored this slide about this girl, but rather that it didn't solve the problem entirely, and so it was not worth dwelling on. And then right into the next data slide, continuing to refine this process. And I think there it made it apparent to me that I would not have done well in academia, that I don't have a like deep passion for research to that extent, right? Like, this is a person who cured cancer in a human being and only spent 15 seconds talking about it because the fight's not over yet. And from there, I thought that is crazy to me. That is a level of drive and motivation that I don't have for a similar line of work. And again, with this theme of like this therapy working and me feeling comfortable in my own skin, I think that's okay. That I don't have to lie to myself and gas myself up thinking that I'm destined to be the one that cracks cancer or brain injury or any of the other problems that I was looking at in grad school. A part of that therapy was acknowledging that, you know, in terms of what I love to do and what my skill set is, it's not that. It's not the guy who has a footnote of curing cancer because the battle isn't over yet. Although talking about it, now that is much more of my jam. So I just thought that was interesting. And to me, it's kind of like labeling the emotions that I was feeling in therapy. Like before, you know, for those of you who missed it, I was so deep into intellectualizing my own feelings that when my therapist asked me how certain experiences made me feel, I could only say, well, I got sweaty and cold, you know, biological metrics. I could not bring myself to describe my emotions in words. And so I'm more comfortable with not defining greatness. But when I had finished listening to that talk, greatness is the feeling that I got. And not only was I feeling that I had just been in the presence of a great speaker or a great scientist, I also had felt a sense of jealousy. Again, growing up in these very hyper-competitive environments, there's competition, and there are people who burn out of the competition and people who adapt rigorously to that competition. And it's silly because I objectively don't think, I know, surprise, surprise, that I will have as big of an impact on the world as someone who is able to create a treatment that cures cancer. But that's why I think greatness is such an interesting concept in terms of there's not one definition of what that could look like, right? Certainly, I don't think that the human impact that I will have will match nearly as much as, again, a cancer cure. But I think that's because my version of greatness would necessitate looking different. And I think something for me to think about going forward to the future is really defining what that greatness looks like. I kind of want to hear from chat if that idea of greatness is, if that resonates, or if that's something that you even think about, or if I'm too high on my own whatever. Was that about CAR T cells specifically? I think I've heard the story of the 9-year-old group before. I'm not going to confirm nor deny that because, again, I want to limit doxable information. When you're at these academic retreats, do you all do fun stuff too, like drinking or a big movie event? Kind of depends on the university that you go to. Some universities have more elaborate things planned. I know that at my old university where I was at grad school, there was an attempt to make retreat more fun by having it be a multi-day thing. Oh, dude, being in a multi-day event, that sounded like my worst nightmare, so I chose not to go. I only attended the retreats that were one day and on location. But yeah, like scientists are totally capable of having fun. It's just I'm so asocial that I don't count myself in that category. I just go home. But yeah, I kind of want to know if the idea, or even if you feel propelled, because I know that like not everybody has greatness as a motivating factor, and I think that's fine and good even, because greatness is something that you almost by definition will not achieve. Not to say that you can't, but because the target is always moving. Again, with like the Mr. Beast thing, it's easy, I think, to feel the enjoyment in the chase but never quite get there, right? It's like not, I don't think it's a very enlightened view or enlightened position on happiness or satisfaction, because I've met people in my personal life that feel like they are a lot more at peace with their own existence than I am. And part of me wishes that I could have that, because part of the goal of greatness, I think, is fueled by this anxiety. So it's like this constant tumult. And I don't think that I will achieve that kind of, the clean nirvana or enlightenment that, releasing yourself from attachments to these ideas of greatness will allow you to do. But I don't care. I think that's stubborn defiance, maybe. I have no aspirations for greatness. I'm just here to have a good time. I think that's maybe what I'm afraid of. If I were to take this herbal treatment to rid myself of anxiety, because I don't know what I would look like if I'm just here for a good time, because Toxo works really, really hard, despite this peace, I think, that she's able to have. But for me, I think if I don't have anxiety, I just collapse into a black hole. If I adopt the idea that I'm here for a good time, I don't know what will happen to me. I might collapse under the weight of my own ego and dissolve into an infinitely dense point of no return. So I think that's maybe a pretty condensed way of why I'm afraid of the herb, we'll say. I think teaching is even more important than being in academics. Imagine how many people you'll inspire to do great things. I sure hope so. We have a lot of students in the audience, and when you all go out and do great things, let me know. I think it would be really fun to follow you all on your journeys, because that would be cool. That'd just be cool to know. The hedonic treadmill stops for nobody. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's always the next best thing, but I acknowledge, like, there's not a number that would mean success. In fact, I don't really feel attached to numbers for greatness. I think when I start to see myself as good as my idols, I think maybe that would be the end point for me. That the educators and YouTube content creators that I look up to, when I feel as though I have made a similar impact as they had or have, maybe that's when the journey ends. But because that's like such a high ambition goal, there's a very realistic chance that I expire before that even happens. But I think the journey, is very fun and worth trying for. I definitely care a lot about being useful to people around me, but I don't have any grand aspirations, to be honest. And not everybody has to have grand aspirations. I think I am wired to aspire, which is not always a recipe for happiness, because again, it can be quite problematic, and that also says nothing about whether or not I could be happy any other way, right? This whole idea of anxiety and achievement. I don't know another world where I could chill. I think that's one way you could put it. Greatness in your life is whatever you define it as. As an example, Diogenes found his own greatness in just being himself. Even when Alex the Great offered him anything, he just said, "Get out of my sunlight." That's pretty fun. I'm not a STEM major. I have a degree related to history. Yeah, it is flexible as to what greatness means. My definition of greatness would have to be something that I feel is correct for me. It's just that, besides sort of the idea of achieving as much as my idols, isn't so well defined beyond that. I have strong perfectionist tendencies, and I'm learning to accept that not everything I do will always be perfect, and it's usually unobtainable. I guess it's the same with greatness. Got to accept. Yeah, I think so. And I also envy perfectionists to some degree, because the intrinsic desire to do things well, as long as you can act on that perfectionism, as long as the perfectionism and anxiety doesn't prevent you from acting, I think it makes the quality of work you do quite good. And I wish I could have some of that. Maybe not all of that, but some of that. I mean, I have aspirations, but I see them as a means to an end and not an end by themselves. I think that's a good way of looking at it. The journey never ends. There's always more to do, to try for. Eventually, if not stopped by illness or injury, you'll be stopped by time. I have thought a lot about that, and it's something that I've confided a lot into Toxo, where I'm like, I don't think I really feared the end of my existence prior to this year, and I think very recently I've begun to think a lot more about, like, oh my god, I have so many things to do. I really hope I do all of them. And I think that like it's a weird, maybe you could call it midlife crisis. I don't really think that that is fair. I'm a little young for a midlife crisis, I would say. But it certainly is something that has been weighing on my mind for a while now. Would you happen to know a good program for evolution and origin of life research? That's kind of biology outside of my expertise. So I would not in good conscience be able to recommend anything for you. Sort of my field of biology uses evolution as a tool as a framework, I should say, to understand how life works, but most of what I do doesn't analyze evolution itself. Again, as a tool, it's quite useful in terms of like understanding what proteins are conserved and to how much. But in terms of like the changing of species over time, that's really not my field. Sometimes I do something and it comes out amazingly, but then it prevents me from taking risks if I'm not sure things will go the way I envision. I think a lot of it is about a lack of control. Yeah, I relate to that because in a party situation, there's so little control you have over what's happening around you. Whereas in a conversation, if it's between 1 to 6 people, you all take turns, you all speak relatively the same amount. It's a little more clear when it's your time to talk. There's a topic to talk around. You can think about what to say while someone else is talking, whereas some of that anxiety from not being good at yapping is just like, oh my god, things are moving very quickly, and I don't know if my joke will be funny, and then I don't say anything, and then just on my phone all night, which isn't very helpful or useful. It's good to set realistic goals, otherwise you'll end up like Alex the Great after he died. He said, for whom the world was not enough and is now buried 6 spans therein. Just be happy with you. Yeah. I think it would be... I mean, I do agree with that in principle, right? And that's why I think I have this jealousy when it comes to people who are cool with just having a good time. Like, I think there's a quote from The Good Place. Let me look it up because I want to get it right. Because I actually like hearing this quote from the show The Good Place actually like made me want to cry. Let's see if I can find the quote. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, I found it. Yeah, so in The Good Place, Cheetah describes his mind as the sound of a fork makes when it's in the garburator or garbage disposal. This like constant buzzing of thoughts, ideas, ambitions, anxieties, something very, very relatable, I think, to me. And I don't know who I would be if that noise ever stopped. It's certainly not always pleasant, but it's the noise that kind of animates my life, which I think is kind of interesting. I've also been having therapy, and I can say the reoccurring theme is I can't control how others react to me and not obsess about it as much. Yeah, no, I mean, since I talked about my therapy session, it's fair game, as long as we stray away from like advice giving, which I think is out of my scope. You said you did not go into academics because of anxiety, but did you also have that anxiety when thinking about teaching? Are you fully happy with the choice you made in the end? I'm very happy about my choice to teach. I think that so with regards to traditional academics and research, right, you're never not working. Any time that you spend in the lab is on the clock, and then when you get home and your stuff doesn't work, you're still working because you have to think about what to do the next time you go into work. It never stops. It is the noise that permeates your life forever, and you have to be a very good scientist and in control of your own functioning, I think, to be good at that kind of thing, which I just wasn't. And in terms of teaching, I actually can go home and relax because whatever happens will happen, and when I'm done grading, that's it. And summer vacation is also very nice, so and then it's preparation for the next semester. But the challenges, although they are different semester to semester, they're not completely dissimilar. There are variations on issues that we've had in previous semesters. It's a constant process of refinement, which is preferable to having a new problem thrown at you every 3 days in an academic working environment. What are we talking about? Whatever. It's just chatting stream. I think right now we're probably talking about aspirations, goals, careers, etc., and this idea of what it means to achieve greatness. To be fair, when I'm teaching, I'm never not working either. Marking, doing admin, doing supervision. Yeah, it's very busy, but in terms of, well, I don't know. It's not really fair for me to say because I teach at a university level, so there are certain aspects of it that does carry over, but I can imagine that if you don't teach at an undergrad level, that the teaching job is, you have to wear a lot more hats. So for me, I just wear the hat of the guy that you see in lab that watches over you, gives you a lecture, and grades your work. But if you teach below that level of age, I can imagine that gets quite stressful in the same kind of way where your work never leaves you. I teach up to PhD in engineering. Wow. Marking, doing admin, doing supervision. That's crazy. I think maybe it's a country thing. I'm in the UK. Yeah, maybe. Different rules for different folks, maybe. I just started a section on prions. I was told prions are PRP, CSs. I wonder if you're the guy to ask, are all prions PRP? No, they are not. Yeast have prions. You can actually watch a journal club of mine in the live tab that I have on my channel to learn about what other prions are out there. They're not all major prion protein, right? There are other prion proteins as well. Yeah, country differences might make quite a difference in terms of like what you are expected to do in what role. In the US, we do have like full-time staff that, not every university, but enough of us out there that it's a thing. All right. It's also pretty interesting because I thought that I would have had like 3 hours worth of yapping content, but I've actually gone through all of my topics. So from here on out, this is true yapping at this point. So like the planned portion of the stream, quote unquote, like what I had come from, prepared to talk about, that part is over. So now I turn it a little bit around back to chat, see if there's anything that chat wants to talk about. It's kind of in this realm. I don't want to stray too out of topic, but certainly if there are things that you want to ask me or topics you want to chat about or biology that you want to inquire about, now would be a good time to ask those things, because I think I am pretty happy with what I have covered so far. I guess I should ask if you all enjoyed this different kind of format. I missed all the plan part. Could you summarize like in 2 sentences so I don't repeat stuff you've already covered? Yeah, sure, no problem. I am a machine that is animated by anxiety, and I'm okay with that. I would say that a lot of the stream had to do with sort of analyzing the role of anxiety in terms of how I function just as a human being, since I am the topic of the stream, because it is my stream after all. It's been interesting to hear from people's reactions in terms of what that sounds like to them. The Inside Out movie where you're piloted by your emotions. I think that I'm primarily piloted by anxiety, and a lot of the stream was exploring my thoughts about parts of that are good, parts that are bad, as well as acknowledging that like I'm not a great yapper. Like I can't just spew, and I'm not using spew in a derogatory way. I actually find it quite admirable that there are entertainers, streamers out there who can just turn on their mic and just like talk, and it's entertaining and it's nice. And I myself enjoy a lot of yapping streams, so there's a lot of dedication to that idea as well. How did you manage to get a teaching job at a uni that actually pays a living wage and offers job security? I've heard horror stories. It's horror stories. Yeah, I mean, it's really tough. It's tough out there. I applied to 30 jobs in a college town, and only got 1 acceptance, so it is bad. It is getting better, as in there are more universities that are viewing full-time teaching staff as important members of the department because, well, you pay me a full-time job, and then your professors who are doing grant awarding research can do other things. It's work share, and so I have heard that there is a trend in opening more full-time teaching positions. It's not easy, let me tell you. I was very close to taking a job that paid under minimum wage. I'm talking like, like worse than fast food for all the education that I've had. So it's definitely not something that I would say that people should have as their number one job that they aim for and then don't apply for anything else. Because I also applied to like traditional research jobs. I applied to positions in teaching departments, so departments within universities that help professors teach, providing various supports. I applied to communication roles and grant writing roles. I focused on a lot of my skills that were not directly research focused. And then, then from there, it's just a numbers game. You just apply until you get something. I'm about to finish my bachelor's degree in molecular life sciences, and I'm not sure what I want to do with the rest of my life. So I'm really glad to be able to listen to your perspective. Yeah. I would say that the academic life didn't work for me, but also just know that just because you go to graduate school doesn't mean that you do research for a living. If I were to redo my life, I would go to graduate school all over again, especially at the university that I went to. The only thing that I would have maybe changed was I would have been a better researcher, right? Because you just learn on the job. That's part of being a graduate student. I'm a much better researcher now than I was just starting, so I would have saved a couple of years of fumbling. But yeah, it's very exciting that you're about to finish a bachelor's in biology, and because biology, the study of life, is always going to be relevant. There's always going to be a market for biologists somewhere. It's just whether or not the money behind biology contracts or is expanding is, of course, going to be different depending. But good luck. I think that it is very cool to be working in biology and getting to study the thing that I love so much. And I do consider myself to be actively studying, in part due to this channel. I loved learning in graduate school. It was a great experience, and that's why I continue to do it. Although I needed I wouldn't be reading papers for fun at home without this YouTube channel. And so I thank you all for giving me the mouthpiece to actually do that and do it for a purpose that I find to be worth the struggle when it comes to putting in the effort to actually read. I have a question, but it might be too specific. It pertains to a certain kind of virus. I'm likely not going to be able to answer because I'm not a virologist. A lot of what I've learned about viruses has just come purely by chance, right? Just what I've picked up over the years. So I'm not a dedicated virologist, so it's not likely that I'm going to be able to know what it is that you want to know. I'm not even a microbiologist. It's so funny because when I have people I work with for collabs on YouTube and stuff, a lot of people describe me as a microbiologist. This, I don't really blame them. I know that a lot of people make that mistake. I do a lot of microbiology education, but I specifically label myself as cell and molecular biology because I don't want to pigeonhole myself into a certain topic and give people the wrong idea that I'm an expert in everything bacteria and virus related. I'm not. Somebody from my group who recently finished her master's got a pretty nice job at a startup where she extracts active ingredients and stuff from herbal remedies. Oh, that's really fun. I'm actually just having a conversation with my teaching assistant about that kind of field, which is great because US supplements are not regulated, which is really annoying. So if something is a supplement legally, there is no proof that you have to have that your supplement actually does anything. It can be filled with nonsense. There's no rigorous testing, etc., etc. So that kind of job is doing real good for real people, and that's a very neat field to go into. I don't not everybody's watched the kombucha video. It's also probably my worst video. I thought it was going to do gangbusters because I put Brad Leone in the thumbnail at first, but it ended up being the worst video that I made. But I do think that there's something interesting about despite all the education that I've had, I've also fell somewhat for the supplement grift, despite being a biologist, just because the microbiome was so hot back when I was in graduate school that it was very easy to convince myself that drinking kombucha was going to do anything. And it might, you know, I don't want to be on record that I don't think kombucha does anything. It's just not proven to do anything yet in people in a research group that is larger than 18 people, we'll say. So it's just kind of food for thought. That was a really humbling experience too. The realization that I am not a paragon of rational thought all the time. Introducing Placebo-Sol, the newest supplement on the market. Placebos are interesting, and I don't remember who it was that I was talking to. One of the psychologist VTubers, either Mylan or Sidere, about the mechanism behind placebo. And you know, in biology studies, we hear all the time about placebo, or rather, well, in a biology lab, you wouldn't call it a placebo. You would call it a vehicle control, because the mouse doesn't know that it's getting a drug. The mouse is just getting something. And so studies that show that placebos have an effect, there should also be, in addition to a placebo control, also a no treatment control in alongside with the placebo, because of this idea of the regression to the mean, right? So if you are doing a trial and there are people who are sick in that trial, if you give them nothing, a percentage of those people are just going to get better on their own because of regression to the mean, right? Like your body is trying to achieve a level of homeostasis. And if your clinical trial or your intervention or whatever it is that you're trying to test, if you are trying to test that on people who are suffering from whatever affliction that you want to study, some of them are just going to get better no matter what. And so I find that to be really thought-provoking, because I always thought that placebo only worked through psychological mechanisms, that the belief that you are getting better will make you better. And there might be some truth to that. I don't actually know that for a fact, but yeah, sometimes just people just get better. And I never really stopped to think that, oh, that could just be true. That's pretty interesting. Of course, in the mice, it doesn't really matter as much because there's not a psychological component to the mouse. At least we don't think so. So those, I think, are still pretty valid. But in terms of some of this other stuff, regression to the mean is pretty interesting to separate from psychological effects of the placebo. My sister came to me recently citing a study that predicted gold content would limit telomere shortening. She now believes we should consume gold supplements. Oh, I mean, okay. So this is very careful, and they're to be very clear. As far as I know, to my knowledge, consuming gold supplements is not going to actually do anything. But that doesn't mean that gold as a tool is not very useful. I've been learning a lot about gold nanoparticles, which have all sorts of very interesting anti-pathogenic properties and can be used to package drugs and the like inside. So gold, for health purposes, is a thing. It's just not a thing that you're going to find on the shelf of your supplement store. It's maybe going to be a big deal when it comes to revolutionizing the way that people manufacture drugs, but you're probably not going to see a benefit, I would say, if you are buying gold stuff from GNC, at least in the current age. And it's so hard. It's so hard to convince people otherwise, because, like, if you want to believe something, you're going to believe it. That's just human, right? And even scientists do it. I mean, we're not immune to that kind of confirmation bias. But, you know, telling her that, oh, Phi the Neutrophil says that those gold supplements are likely garbage, likely not gonna do anything, which I think is unfortunate, unless your sister is the kind that can be swayed by contradictory evidence, because there's something very potent about believing that doing something as easy as taking a pill can improve your health. That can be the case for certain supplements. I'm thinking about certain vitamins that are hard to get from your diet, right? Like vitamin D, like some of these fat soluble vitamins, if you don't consume enough, there's a body of research that shows that it is beneficial. And so some supplements are worth thinking about. The overwhelming majority, because of the rule that you don't have to regulate supplements, can be quite tricky to justify a purchasing decision. I had a presentation today about nanoparticles, including gold for drug delivery. Yeah, yeah. It's very hot right now, from what I can tell, having come in from my research background into a new world of biology. I hear every day about how gold nanoparticles are like the new hot thing. It's pretty exciting. I read some of the study and thought it was quite plausible. However, I have no choice but to allow her to treat herself as her own guinea pig. Yeah, yeah, it's pretty tricky, I would say. Yeah, you can't you it's really tough to dissuade people from believing what it is that they want to believe. Not what they believe, but what they want to believe, if they have a desire to believe it. And there are many times in my own life that I have found myself guilty of this. Again, with the probiotic thing, like, wouldn't it be great if I could just homebrew my own kombucha at a cheap tea, and that's good for me for some reason? Wouldn't that just be swell? It's certainly cheaper than getting insurance in America, or having to pay out of pocket for a doctor's visit. Maybe this is prophylactic. I want to believe that there is a cheap solution to my health, and maybe that's kombucha. It's hard to shatter the illusion that there is no easy solution to health. Aren't gold nanoparticles used to genetically engineer plant cells? I would believe that they could. As far as I know, last time I checked on the world of plant biology, that's done through argobacterium, a tumor-causing bacteria that can force DNA into cells. Whether or not the agrobacteria are packaged into gold nanoparticles, I'm not entirely sure. Certainly interesting to think about, though. I've thought a lot more about materials recently in my job than I have in my time in graduate school. The gene gun. Oh, yes, 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 the gene gun. Oh, does that count as a gold nanoparticle? It's been a long time since I thought about the gene gun, if I'm being totally honest, because my department didn't have one. So if you didn't know, there's a device called a gene gun that can actually shoot little bullets that contain DNA that can just enter your cells. So no fancy electroporation or transformation reagent. You actually just shoot the DNA in there. Not inject, but like fire them in there, which I think is really funny. Tungsten particles are also used sometimes, I believe. Yeah, interesting, interesting. That's really a blast from the past, the gene gun. Always talked about in theory, but never shown to us. I know we did electroporation and lithium iodide as transformation protocols back in undergrad. So electroporation basically takes advantage of the fact that if you shock the membrane of certain cells, they loosen enough, just enough to get your DNA in there. And lithium chloride, I don't really know if people know the mechanism of how lithium chloride works, but it's supposed to do a similar thing, which I found to be pretty interesting. Me happily using gold nanoparticle infused skincare products. I want to do a skincare stream. How many of you chatters would be interested in a skincare stream? I'm wondering if I can get funding to do it. If any beauty company wants to sponsor me to talk about their research, I think that would be really interesting. The gene gun sounds like a great way to become lactose tolerant. Hee. Ooh, the issue of lactose tolerance sweats nervously. In eukaryotic cells? Does gene gun work in eukaryotic cells? I think I only learned about it in the context of single-celled organisms. I don't actually know if gene gun works in embryos, so I think it works in yeast, so by definition, I think that does mean that it works in eukaryotes. Show us your shaving routine. I will if the companies pay me. How does a gene gun work? Some of you molecular biology students who are still hanging on in chat might know more than I do. I don't actually remember how the gene gun works. I just know that it exists, and it's a way that people get DNA into cells. Eukaryotes are dumb. Return to prokaryotes. Oh my gosh, there's a chat that someone I collabed with, Spolax, shared with me. So Spolax works in a biology lab primarily with prokaryotes, and was complaining to me that eukaryotes are too complicated. They're too complicated, and they're hideous to work with. because they do things like splice their genes. So for those of you who don't know, one of the key features of eukaryotic organisms is that once you make the mRNA that codes for protein, that mRNA can be sliced and diced any number of ways to give rise to different proteins in combinatorial fashion. It's probably not the first time since you've heard me say this, considering if you've watched my prion video, I talk about splicing then. But bacteria don't do that. So there's a whole bunch of weird gene nonsense that happens in eukaryotes that prokaryotes don't do. And he shared with me a chat. It was so funny, calling him out, being like, this prokaryotic bias, this bias of prokaryotic is essentially the biology version of 2D greater than 3D. 2D girls better than 3D girls. And I thought, that's the funniest thing that I've heard all week. That is very true. And then it happened to me, actually. My yeast lab right now is not going very well. Bacteria never complain. Bacteria are always there for you. They are so solid. They are so very well known and very easy to work with. So easy that sometimes we let children do it. These yeast have been griefing me, and it's pretty annoying. So I wrote back to him saying that I agree that I have been pilled 2D greater than 3D prokaryote over eukaryote. Very fun, very fun. Oh, have a sip of my water. I'm losing my voice. I'm kind of wondering how you all are enjoying this kind of just chatting stream. If you think that I should keep this a sort of occasional thing when I have like a list of topics to take care of. Because I was thinking it'd be fun, just like how I have like a themed background this time around, that like maybe I have like a seasonal just chatting stream, because I don't foresee myself doing this as a regular feature of my content. Just because, yeah, I'm not good at yapping, and I need like a backlog of interesting ideas to share. Otherwise, there's no value added. Yeah, I figured it'd be cute to like have a different holiday just chatting stream. I don't know. Yeah, and holidays also mean that I probably have less work depending on which holiday we're talking about, which would be fun, and I get to get dressed up like this, which would be very cool. I knew this channel through Cideray. I'm 100% to science adjacent yapping. I think Cideray is the queen of science adjacent yapping. I was actually, you missed it, Mega Crap. I was actually lumping like a shoveling praise onto Cideray, because I'm like, she is so good at the yap game. Like I am, you could study that, honestly, in terms of like refining the art of yap, and I don't think that I could match that level of chaos. I live my life completely orderly. I joke that like on the D&D alignment chart, I am lawful good. I don't take steps into unfamiliar territory without extreme caution. Love the occasional random streams like coding, yapping, or ranking stuff. I enjoy doing them too, and it also requires way less prep than a journal club, which is nice. It's also just like intrinsically rewarding, considering that I too am a human, and I think the stream format is a unique environment to be doing science communication, just because science communication tends to be very buttoned up. I think about the choice to not appear on camera as a way to soften the professionalism of science communication, because I don't want to be seen as like a professor, because I'm not a professor. That would be wrong factually, but also I don't want to be seen as like a white coat. I'd prefer to just be a guy that knows a lot, and that also allows me to just talk about whatever I want, instead of having to be like a face of science communication, right? Like a representative of the scientific community, when in reality, I think you can still do that and also maintain a level of connection, like a personal connection to the communication of science, which I think is pretty interesting. I really like it, but I just started following your channel, so I don't know how your other streams are. Welcome to the Fiverse. Glad to have you here then. I mostly do very like journal club streams. So journal clubs are ways that they're so let me back up. A journal club is when a researcher will present someone else's research that is outside of the lab or occasionally inside the lab. And I think I really love journal clubs. I loved them back when I was in graduate school. As my favorite part of being a researcher is just to get to read and learn. And I think a lot of science communication out there really dumbs down a lot of the exciting work that's going on. And it's not like, again, it's not derogatory. They have to, because there's a lot of stuff that you have to learn before you can appreciate the full scope of what is happening. And most people just don't want to dedicate that time to reading a paper because they can't. You have to go to grad school to learn all the specialized terminology and stuff. So in terms of what my other streams look like, I make journal clubs for the public, essentially. As long as you've taken high school biology, I think you can understand what I'm talking about. And because I do it for the public, it's also like 2 hours long generally, because there's no way I can communicate everything in 1 hour, given how much background I need to walk everybody through. Because I strongly believe that like me reading a science communication article, like something that's been filtered through a science journalist, it's actually not very exciting to me. I need to hit harder, and often what hits harder is looking at the actual data. So if you're interested in thinking like a scientist or looking at data like a scientist, that's what my typical streams are like. So I just turned your stream on and heard you say that. Oh, that's awesome. Well, that might be a good transition. Turned my stream on. I thought she was streaming herself. I was like, oh, I could actually rate her. Is she like what is the word I'm trying to say here? Also, welcome something stochastic, the husband mod of Cider just joined chat. Very exciting. Is she red tomatoing, I should say? In the topic of yapping, you should end every chatting stream with Xiao Hong Shu. I actually don't know what you mean by that. Small, red book? Yeah, I don't really know what you mean by that. Yap dollar meme? This is so far beyond my comprehension right now. I'm out of it. What was I saying? Oh gosh. Yeah, I think that's also one of the strengths, I think, of using this kind of format, because especially as VTubers, we don't have to put on, you don't have to believe that I'm a real person, which I think is actually better when it comes to staying for a stream like this, because even me, I have a hard time keeping a lecture on, like a lecture for students, right? Faculty talks, I think, are really amazing, but a lecture for students, I actually find that, like, unless you are a very talented communicator as a professor, it actually is kind of difficult to see the big picture over some of the minute details that you might need for an exam or something. Just been lurking. Thank you for the kind words. Go check out Saturday. Her stuff is linked in the comments. Again, I had said that I am constantly. You missed the beginning of the stream where I was saying nice things too. Where, yeah, she's like, I think in terms of yap ability, sort of on par with Corpos in terms of like the raw yap talent. Like, there's a lot to be said about like what constitutes as a good streamer or a good VTuber or a good entertainer. There are certainly multiple different variables, and some that you may have caught if you tuned into Mylan's stream about the influences that influence people's behaviors and decisions as to whether or not to super chat a certain streamer. But I think if we were to like do the JoJo like the stat block for JoJo that I had in like my H. pylori segment, I think Cider has like an S tier yapper, so please go do check her out if you so desire for some psychology adjacent scientific yapping. I've discovered both of you at the same time. It's good for me because I used to study psychology but now study biology. Well, there you go. That's awesome. That was also me back when I was deciding what to do with my academic career. I uh, I kind of joke that like in a different life I maybe could have been Cidere's peer in terms of I also was very interested in studying similar topics as to what she is studying professionally. Um, yeah, so I was deciding between biology and psychology. And I ultimately made the decision to do biology because the return on investment in terms of money was a little better. And also, I think that I would have made for a pretty bad psychologist because I'm terrible at statistics. And statistics is such a big part of what it means to be a psychologist, especially in the current year, post replication crisis. That I think that would have killed a lot of the enjoyment that I had for designing experiments. Um, Although it's kind of hard to say because I don't know what my life would have been like had I chosen psychology out of undergraduate. What I will say is that like knowing what I know about biology and how I enjoy biology and the aspects of biology I enjoy, a lot of the joy that I get from reading in my field is the elegance of experimental design. Whereas I don't want to like crap on psychology, but I don't feel that way about reading psychology papers, which I do from time to time just as a casual person. I feel like the art in psychology is more to do with making sure that you actually are correct than it is about nifty experimental design. Although, Sai, if you're still in chat, you can feel free to correct me on that. Or yeah, like making sure your findings are correct. That I think is artful and can be quite nice to see. And the implications of what you find are also, I think, an animating factor of why that's nice. But in terms of biology, I think I can read almost anything and be happy with what I'm reading because what I find gratification in is this sort of the eureka moments, I think, that happen when it goes to planning how to do your experiments and fighting the chaos that is variables, right? Because in biology, you have enough control where you can actually limit certain variables, and that makes experimental design very satisfying. I think in psychology, because so many things are out of your control, you just end up throwing math at it until you are given permission to make conclusions. And again, Sai, if you're in the chat, if you're still around, feel free to call me out on that. But that is sort of my general understanding of how psychology functions. Psychology came first for me, but I quickly found neuropsychology, which was much more interesting. That itself expanded to biology general, at least human biology and genomics. Psychology to biology pipeline. Getting to know how things work mechanistically at a molecular level, I think, is a great funnel from psychology to biology. But like there are also mechanisms in psychology, they're just not mediated by molecules, or you can't really draw that line as easy. Honestly, psych sometimes feel like it's 90% assumptions. That's what I mean. I think like the satisfaction, I mean, that's kind of curious, Sai, what you find satisfying about the work that you do. Kind of what motivated you to choose psychology over biology? Because again, I think I was at this exact crossroads and I know how I turned out. But it's kind of curious to see a perspective from a different side, if you don't mind sharing. I was motivated in part by the experiments done by a now disgraced Cornell professor who did work on understanding the psychology behind people's eating habits. I've forgotten his name, but he had shown that if you have a bowl of infinite soup, that people will overeat that portion. So his whole agenda was to convince people that in order to lose weight or to control your diet, that you should be limiting your portion size, which is reasonable advice, but apparently the way that he did some of these research experiments was deceitful, or maybe not completely honest. I liked his one experiment where he had mixed chocolate syrup into strawberry yogurt and then asked his graduate students how the raspberry flavor of the yogurt was, like completely gaslighting them into believing that it was something else, to show that our expectations of the food that we eat is heavily influenced by what our expectations. So the experience of the food that we eat is highly influenced by our expectations of what that food is going to be. So if you manage your expectations, you should be able to manage your diet a little better. One of my favorite things that he ever did, I don't know if that's still valid given all the flack that he's gotten. I'm far too jaded to answer that question right now. Ask me again after the thesis is submitted. You know what? That's fair. I'm on the other side of not being an active student anymore, and I think my relationship with biology has improved because of that. So that is very, very fair. Yeah. I've performed multiple transfections, but I've never heard of a gene gun before. I'm beginning to believe that the gene gun is a complete scam, that it's just something cool that people started to say, because I've never seen a gene gun. I only know it because we had to learn about it, and then we never even got to use it. Perform multiple transfections. I'm guessing lithium chloride, electroporation, maybe even a microinjection, depending on what your system is. All things that are not as cool as working with something called a gene gun. What a shame. Okay. Yeah. Way back when I was inspired by psychology/neuropsychology, it came a lot from the books of Oliver Sacks. That's a familiar name, but I don't quite remember why I know that name. I think I've always been a little bit of a purist when it comes to the publications of scientists influencing my own beliefs, which is kind of interesting because, like, as a stubborn biology student, I didn't partake in what I'm doing right now, I should say. Like, I didn't seek biology content that was catered to someone interested in biology, which I think is kind of like paradoxical, maybe even hypocritical of me, because I think from a very early age I had known that I wanted to be Neil deGrasse Tyson, and so watching other biology educators do their thing would, if I had watched them and I had their idea, it would not feel like mine anymore. So I think it was stubbornness that prevented me from learning casually about the things that I wanted to learn instead of academically, which is kind of messed up in a certain way. The man who thought his wife was a hat. Oh. Did he publish? Did Oliver Sacks, is he the one that mistook his wife as a hat, or were the books about Oliver Sacks? I see. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. It's kind of interesting. The only actual piece of biology not, I was going to say pop fiction, that's not even true. The only piece of biology pop science that I ever read in my entire life was actually The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. Oh, he wrote the cases up. Oh, okay. I see. Yeah, I learned about them in my neurobiology of diseases class, talking about regionalization of brain injury and how that mechanistically relates to what things do in the brain, which also fueled my desire to join a neurobiology lab as a graduate student. So it's very fun that you are around, because I do plan on covering more neurobiology stuff in the future. Of course, that is where my actual graduate expertise comes in. Gotcha. Yeah, the only piece of pop fiction that I've ever read was The Origin of Species, and I really want to talk about that one day. I did on stream one time, but I want to do like a full Find the Truth for Phil video on my second channel, just to be able to read Darwin's own thoughts. Even though I wouldn't describe evolution quite the way he does in that book, it was really nice to see someone write in a way that was very human. So if you didn't know, Origin of Species is not his academic book. It's the book meant for casual reading, which is why it's actually possible to read that without getting absolutely lost in the sauce. I have not read his other works, but the Origins had a very big impact on me as an undergraduate student. I picked it up because I was snooty, like cocky kind of guy, thinking I'm a biologist, I should read evolution, I should read Origin of Species, which is such a try-hard thing to do, but I don't regret doing it, actually, because I ended up liking it so much that I started to take rhetoric classes because I wanted to analyze how Darwin wrote and how he communicated. So that actually, me reading it or attempting to read it in high school, it was very difficult to read, and I don't think I understood a lot of it in high school, but he wrote in such a beautiful way that it convinced me to take rhetoric classes, and from rhetoric classes I've practiced a lot of communication and all the things that are required in order to write in a way that is appealing, and that led directly to the formation of this channel. So I mean, I do have Darwin to thank in part for where I am today for a couple of different reasons. Love your work, Phi. GF is about to start her honors working with Burkholderia pseudomeli, and I can almost pretend I know what she's talking about after I watch her vids. I'm a psych nerd myself. A lot of psych biology overlap, which I love, considering that is very near and dear to my own personal heart, being caught between those two worlds as a student myself. That's awesome. I know nothing about that species, but that sounds very exciting. Oh, didn't really know that. I assumed it was academic. Yeah, you can actually just read that online. It's free. It's a public domain. Some British company, I think, has it for free online. It's not very readable in the format it is online because it's just like a formatless text page, you know, with like paragraph formatting. But I highly recommend that you read the intro and the outro. It's also why I quoted, you know, some of the most beautiful words in my recent video about the microbiome, right? This idea that you know, through this kind of tumult, this kind of eternal struggle, we get at the end of all of that nonsense, beautiful forms being evolved, which I thought was just such a beautiful thought, right? Like, it's very nerdy to assign this kind of poetic or narrative to the work of Darwin, but I genuinely did feel that way, and it's how you can tell that my passion for biology is very genuine, right? Like it's very nerdy to relate to cells, but I think there is beauty in thinking about the idea that you are the product of hundreds of thousands of years of strife, and you are the way that you are because you survived, and you only survived because you made it because you survived, and you survived because of the endless struggle against the environment, against others, against everything. You know, despite all odds, you are here in the way that you are now, and that is why evolution is beautiful and very cool. And he has a whole bunch of bangers that are like that in his Origin of Species, as well as in his regular communications with his wife. You know, he was a very sweet, nerdy guy, loved his wife very dearly, a little problematic given that they were related, but otherwise, I do highly recommend that you read those letters as well, because he's just got so much riz. Let's see. Causes melioidosis. Never heard of that affliction. I might look into it for the future, I think. It's only recently endemic to the US, often misdiagnosed as other stuff. That's also interesting on its own. This reminded me of when I read Immune by Kirkazat, and one thing I learned from the book in the entrance exam of my med school was not in the curriculum, and my ego inflated after that. Nice. I want to do a book too. I have a great idea for a book, but it will require a lot of work. But I do have a book as an idea, an ambition on the journey to greatness as something that I would like to try in the future. Either way, you're a great educator. Thank you so much. High five. Discovered your channel after a fun round of pneumonia and sepsis. Goodness gracious. Gotta love all this channel, health channel rabbit holes. And I have to put in a good word for the tier list style TV vid. Thank you so much. I'm not exactly proud of that video. Of course, I was just copying Tierzu, but you know, imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and I needed to start somewhere, and that allowed me to figure out what worked and what didn't, or what I was comfortable with doing and what wasn't, and what I wasn't comfortable with doing. I don't think I'll be doing any more of those as videos, but certainly tier lists for the streams are okay in the future, I think. I'm about to wrap up. It's about dinner time, and Toxo did just get home, so I'll finish up by reading what's left over in chat, and then I will see you all in the future. I have another prion question. My text implied that there is some kind of molecular selection between different types of prion conformation, and the fittest one can emerge. Is this accurate? If it's in your textbook, it's probably correct. I'm not a prion expert, So yeah, I'm not gonna make a comment on that. This one was super fun. Hope to see more like it. I think I might keep it as a little fun thing to do at like the holiday or when there's time offs, just so that I can get dressed and it's a little more fun that way. This one was yeah, and so yeah, again, because I'm nowhere near as good as yapping as some of these other VTubers are. If I have a backlog of interesting things to talk about, I might do that in the future. But all right, so I do have one thing to plug, and that would be my most recent video on how the immune system distinguishes between good and bad bacteria. If you haven't watched that, please go give it some love. I know that the algorithm hasn't yet to really pick it up, so I do appreciate a view and a share if you could do so. And in terms of other things that I have to plug, exciting news maybe in the next month that I can't really talk about right now, but so stuff that I've been dying to talk about but haven't quite gotten the chance to. So stay tuned for that. Thank you all for coming to this very unusual and rare stream of mine. There will be more like it in the future, just not very frequently, I'll say. But thanks for stopping by. I will see you next time. Goodbye, y'all. Goodbye.